All right guys, Jamie here at Thor Off-Road, and we are back in the classroom, this time by request. Somebody messaged in and asked me if I would go through the progression of shocks for Pintop, EVenture, and Dominator. Now last time we did backcountry, Pathfinder, Pintop, so we're going to touch on the Pintop again a little bit as part of this group of shocks and what they do and what would be best for you. So these are totally different than the shocks we did before. The shocks we did before kind of went through the 2.0 to the 2.5 to like the off-road, and these are a little bit more dialed in, way more specific. So we're going to go through them and we're going to see if any of these shocks might be the right ones for you. So again, talking about the Pintop shock. The Pintop shock was a shock that Carli used to basically develop everything. Now, this goes way back, like we had mentioned before in another video, back to the 2nd gen and 3rd gen Dodges, when they were developing their spring rates, when they were doing all of their dialing in and placing valving inside shocks and trying to figure out what worked the best. They used the King 2.5 Pintop shock. Now, in the old Gen 2s and stuff, it wasn't technically a Pintop. And just so we can clarify what Pintop means, because it didn't do this in the last video, Pintop is just about how it mounts, okay? And so they've just called it that. Pintop doesn't have anything to do with what type of shock it is, just how it mounts. It's got a single pole that comes up the top and goes in with a nut. So just clearing that up. If anybody was confused on why they call it the Pintop, that's why. So the King is a great shock for somebody who's an enthusiast, somebody who not only daily drives their truck, but actually uses their truck, goes off-road, is really gonna push it around and is demanding that truck to do some off-road work and do it very, very well. And matched with all of the Carli parts, like the leaf springs, torsion sway bar, all of those things all work together, and they really just dial themselves around that Pintop shock. So why did Carli or any of these other guys try to come out with anything better than that? Well, because of the demand. You guys demanded it. So Carli decided that they would come out with the Dominator shock. Now the Dominator shock is a 3.0 bodied shock, so it's even bigger than the 2.5. Previous video we talked about 2.0 versus 2.5, right? Now we're talking 2.5 versus 3.0. And we've made a huge jump from the backcountry commuter shock up to the Dominator shock. So what does the Dominator mean? Well, I mean, the name really says it all. I mean, it just is a shock that you would use if you want the maximum amount of performance off-road for your truck. And it applies to a bunch of different platforms. So it applies to the guy that's gonna go out and possibly get this truck off the ground a little bit. In other words, you know, maybe jump the truck. Now, there's a whole bunch of videos out there of guys jumping trucks, and I'll say, yes, you can absolutely do that. Do you want to do it all the time? No. And here's why. These trucks really aren't designed to do that, right? But with a big enough, robust shock underneath it, you can manage getting that truck off the ground and landing and being safe and stable. So it's not really for jumping, but it is for a lot of other things. So whenever you're moving a truck around, whether it be at high speed, which is, you know, where the Carli guys have always cut their teeth. They have access to that. Here in Texas, we don't. We get a lot of rock quiling, and we get a lot of guys that are moving across ranches pretty quick. So it's not going to be super high speed off-road and a 9,000 pound truck, but you are going to be moving that shock around a lot. So what does 3.0 do more than a 2.5? Well, now we've bumped up the piston size even bigger. And what does that do? That gives them a lot more available surface area for them to create some extra ports, move the oil around a little bit better or different so that they can manage all of this movement, rebound and compression. They can put different valving in it. They got more space for valving. So there's a whole bunch of tuning that can happen inside this shock to match up to the springs and the size of these trucks. We're also only offering the Dominator in the 5.5 for the Super Duties and only in the 3-inch and up for the Dodges. And I think that's because now we're managing a lot bigger tire. So we've got unsprung weight that we're trying to manage. We're managing a truck that's moving around a lot. We're increasing more heat inside of this shock. And that's going to just demand more surface area, more oil, and a much more robust shock. You know, I think we had talked about the example of a French press in the last one, and of course somebody wanted to make a drinking game out of it. I thought that was hilarious, but it's the same thing. This diameter of the shock got bigger, so it's harder to force the piston through that much oil and that much of a bigger space. So a lot of the tuning has to happen to make it work the way that Carli designed it to do. So this shock is obviously for the guy who is going to really get out there, use his truck, beat on it, and he's demanding a lot of performance back out of that shock. So Pintop versus Dominator 2530, maximum performance, great for everyday use and off-road use and lots of performance. So that leaves us to the EVenture. The EVenture is a completely different animal. Now, Carli doesn't actually manufacture this shock. Of course, they don't manufacture Kings either, but SDI is the one who designed this electronic valving system. Now, these things have been on side-by-sides forever, and if you've ever driven a high-performance car, you'll know that there's always been traction control, stability control inside of all these cars. And what that is doing is that it's moving a lot of the pressure around, or even inside of a system like a magnetic ride, where a lot of things are happening inside that shock that's getting determined by a yaw rate. It's getting determined by your gas pedal, like how fast you're going, how much brake power you're putting in. So as this car is moving and transferring weight around, these shocks are acting exactly like what you would find in a stability control system, where it's going to shut off valving to those wheels, or it's going to loosen them up depending on exactly what you're trying to do. So think about this. Every single shock has got an individual actuator that is controlled by a main module, okay? If you slam on the brakes in a truck with an EVenture kit, it's going to shut the valving off on the front shocks, and it's going to loosen them up in the back, and it's going to be able to stabilize that truck. You're not going to get a whole bunch of dip. Same thing when you're going into a corner, right? The yaw meter is going to pick that up, send it to the module, and it's going to shut valving off, and it's going to basically close it up, and I'll go into detail about that in a second, but it's going to stiffen up the shocks on the one side, loosen them up on the other, so the truck stays nice and flat. It's not going to let it roll quite as much. Now, in saying that, there is a bunch of settings inside of the EVenture kit. You can change it from sport mode to comfort mode, and you can soften the whole thing up by letting the valving work and not close off. Or you can stiffen it up and have a little firmer ride for if you're driving a little faster on-road, soften it up off-road. Like that would be probably the most common way to use it. Couple extra cool features that it has is that it's got a towing option. So you can actually go in there and you can change the towing setting of what you have back there. So you got a heavy load, you can put it on what I think it's 100%, and you can back it down to 50, 75, or 25, depending on how big a load you back. If you've ever towed a trailer and you feel the back of the truck sit there and bounce, that's because that trailer tongue weight is just sitting back there and it's bouncing and activating the suspension. So technically what you can do, and I'm not saying it'll eliminate it completely depending on your load, but you can take a lot of that out by shutting off a lot of what's going on back there and stop the activation of that shock. So how does that happen inside the shock? You got to think about the valving and the way that a piston is designed with all of these holes allowing the oil to go through the piston as the shock actuates, right? Well, in this particular shock, there's multiple ports for the oil to move through. So think of one port being like a screen and one port being like larger holes, okay? So I'm letting a bunch of fluid go through really slow, or I'm letting fluid go through a port really fast. So what this will do is the actuator will actually move and allow oil to move through different types of ports inside of that shock that allow the shock to move around really fast, which is going to give you a much softer ride, meaning it's going to actuate and it's going to be able to move, versus something firm, so it's going to let less oil through, and it's going to require a higher pressure to push that oil through, so that shock is going to be a lot stiffer. So that all happens at like about 200 times a second, okay? Now, why did they add this in? Well, because there's so many guys that using their trucks on such a diverse platform that this just made a whole bunch of sense. Plus, it's very innovative, it's very cool, a lot of us like gadgets, and this is kind of where cars have been going for the last decade. So why not put it in an off-road truck and give us some ability to use technology and manage what we're trying to do with shocks and springs and all this other stuff. So who does the EVenture fit kit? It fits the gadget guy that wants the coolest, newest, most innovative suspension out there, that is going to tow sometimes, that's going to drive to dinner and valet his truck sometimes, and he's going to go off road, and he's going to drive his truck to work. Like a guy who just has his truck to do everything. This is a perfect shock for that guy. And that's why they added it to the system. So back to the other shocks, everyday use, much less expensive. You know, we talked about the Pintop being the most expensive in the other 3 categories. Now, you know, this is now the most affordable, right? And then the Dominator and the EVenture kit are going to be much more expensive. But obviously, after giving you all that information, you can see that it fits a very specific need. The one thing you need to know about Dominator too is that in order to install this kit, it requires some extra brackets. You've got to cut shock mounts out. You've got to re-weld back in. You've got to replace some shock mounts in the front. And why do you have to do that? Well, because that 3.0 shock is so big, it just doesn't fit in the factory position. So there's some extra labor and a few extra parts that are required to put that kit in. So it's going to be a little bit more expensive on the parts side, a little bit more expensive on the labor side. Just FYI, I'm probably not a DIY guy going to do that unless you're very, very handy, okay? So I hope that breaks down that. I appreciate somebody calling in and or emailing in and saying, hey, would you do this comparison? Because didn't really think about doing it, but now it makes perfect sense for guys that are going to spend this amount of money and are looking for something very particular. If you didn't get any of your questions answered, have more, or wondering if it's the right one for you, remember you can always call us, email us, message us on Facebook or Instagram. We're happy to take your questions and make sure that we get the right shocks for you.